Hi. When it comes to piano technique, there's probably nothing that causes more disagreement than the issue of the arm's weight. Now, we get some very extreme ideas. At one end, some people will say, we literally use gravity to move the keys, while the fingers only support the weight. Others will say the shoulder should carry the entirety of the arm's weight, and the keys are moved entirely from the fingers, with no assistance from weight whatsoever. Now, for me, I believe that both of these are extreme distortions. If you've ever tried either of these, or possibly even both, you may find that it gives you some clues, but it doesn't really give you a simple idea to work with, which is actually all that effective. So what I'm going to show you, it might sound rather surprising, but I'm going to show you a very different idea of what weight is for, and how the right approach to weight, not directly into the keys, but indirectly around the fingers. What this will accomplish is it will actually make your hand feel lighter and not heavier at all. So let's demonstrate a bit. If I show you a bit of bark firstly, supposing I was trying to rest the weight into every single finger while trying to play relatively fast. It can easily get very earthbound, very heavy, very unpleasant. I'm trying to direct the weight into my fingers. Weight isn't terribly fast, so ultimately I have to push into them. It just feels horribly stuck under that pressure from the arm. Not pleasant at all. Now, the other extreme, supposing I imagine my arms are just incredibly light, just this sort of floating feeling. Might work for some, but for me what will tend to happen if I think that way for long, I'll get this. I feel I'm skittering around on the surface trying to reach into the keys. The more I pull the keys with my fingers, the more I get pulled even further forwards. And then it's just a real struggle to get into them at all. So what I'd actually want it to look like would be something more like this. I'll explain what it is afterwards. Notice there, I didn't get stuck up high. I wasn't digging down. What I was doing there was I was feeling the weight indirectly around my fingers, and that was making it more light. Now, to show you the simplest way of feeling this effect, if you just take one finger, go as vertical as possible to feel the weight bearing down on that. And now just instantly relax and come back like this. Now the question is, did you feel heavier on the fingertip? Or did you feel lighter? Because you most certainly should have felt lighter. If you didn't, actually it's possible that you're pushing in and you can't take that away. For some people, you'll really struggle to get away from this idea that we have to deliver force into that finger. That's not natural weight. That's a muscular pressure. So this is a really important thing to learn. Feel the weight on the fingertip. Take the weight off the fingertip by letting it sink into the wrist. Now, it's a very simple principle of leverage. I'll show you what's going on there. If I use it doesn't have to be a spirit level, but just something long and tall. If I put it over a key and I let it go, its weight is enough to move that key fairly comfortably. Now, if I change the angle, instead of stacking the weight up vertically, I'm going to bring it around here. Now when I let go, sorry, let's try that again. It may sometimes be just about enough to move the key at the moment, not enough to even move it. And basically it's simple mechanics that the more you bring it round this way, the more the weight is shared between the two ends, the less of the weight bears directly on there. And in fact, that's part of the reason why a lot of people trying to use weight actually get stacked up over like this. They thrust over. Of course, weight doesn't do that. Natural release of weight brings it back. But by trying to use weight directly onto the hand, that puts us in the mindset that we need to be more over the top. The shoulders may go way up like this. Ironically, the extreme fighting against what weight should really do is caused by trying to deliver it into the hand. Whereas if we feel what weight really does, it just takes us down around that point, and it doesn't actually make it heavy on that point. Now, the other thing, in terms of leverage, we can't play with this kind of leverage. So dropping the wrist, notice I can make some sound there, but it's a very indirect application of force. It doesn't even make for a big sound if I let the wrist be the focus of the movement. Because leverage like this, it doesn't really do anything. All that happens is the weight at this end is either enough to move it or it isn't. In this case, it isn't really. So that indirect movement, it just sends all the movement here. Not helpful. If I wanted to use leverage, I'd have to do this. I'd have to pull that way. And again, that's part of the reason why it's so easy to get stuck forwards, because good leverage on the fingers does pull us forwards. That's why we need weight. We need counterweight, not weight on the hand. We need weight here. So when the fingers pull and create that good leverage, we don't have to take part as if it's a single lever. Particularly finger 5, I have to work really hard at making sure I break this habit in myself, because I do this far too often. I tend to let my whole wrist get pulled forwards as if there's a single long lever down here. No. It should be more like this. The leverage is there, and the weight here as a counterweight ensures that we don't get horribly displaced. Because, it's so easy when we're using the fingers. If we feel weightlessness, if we get any of this indirectness, I get trapped so easily on my right side. I really have to work at this habit at the moment by feeling the counterweight, keeping that down. Okay, so let's just go over again both the extreme approaches, the idea of putting weight onto the hand to move the keys, and the idea of taking all the weight away. I want to show why I personally find these rather unhelpful as a mindset. I don't want to say literally never try this at all. But basically, if you're trying to rest into the hand instead of around the hand, there's a direct pressure. Now, I've seen a video before where someone is basically showing this kind of thing, saying the problem here is there's no arm weight, it's finger isolation. Well, yeah, all the movement's in the fingers, but the problem is the weight is blocking the movement. It's a direct pressure from the arm. It's not weight moving the keys like this, no, but it's weight refusing to respond. If I put the weight here instead, that may enable the hand to open up. But it's very simplistic to say this is arm weight solving the problem. What's really going on, above all, is we're taking the weight off the squashed hand. When this comes down a little bit, feel a bit of the weight here. It's like a small scale version of doing this basically. As the wrist comes down, we allow the natural space to open in the hand. Then it's very easy to do this moving the fingers. The problem was not the lack of arm weight on the hand. The problem was too much arm weight on the hand. Ironically, finger isolation, as it's called, is really a sign of pressure into the hand that we've got to learn to take off. If it's solved by weight, it can only be solved by indirect weight that takes the weight off the hand itself and enables it to start moving with freedom. And actually linking that to the other approach, the idea of lightness, no doubt this is why some people will say take all of the arm weight off it. The problem is you can't really get this result without having some sense of the weight by here. Or at least if you do, you've been very lucky indeed. Because what tends to happen if I take the weight off is basically, we think, okay, weightless, that means you go up. Now, even if I don't start to this extreme, this is a bit ridiculous, of course, but if I'm always in the mindset lighten, 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 it's not long before the wrist becomes the high point. And the higher the wrist goes, the more indirect the fingers become. The more that tugs everything all the more forwards. So basically, the problem is getting stuck forwards. Whether this is achieved by lifting the arm too much, being too light, whether it's achieved by thrusting. This is one of the most common problems in piano technique, to go forwards and have no way to get back. The only way we can get back is if we have the capacity to move during an indirect down movement. Now, a direct down movement, that's what traps everything. The indirect down movement, while the fingers move the keys, is just incidental. This isn't the main feature. The fingers moving the keys is the main thing. And we make sure we can do this. Now, given the choice, I would almost always rather do an up movement. If I just have 5 notes ascending like this. By far the easiest thing is to come out of the keys, because that ensures there's no scope for jamming. Literally, there's nothing else above you. You can't jam upwards. If you go downwards, this is where downwards movements go wrong, when they have nowhere left to go. And again, that's because it was direct pressure. The bad down movements, the bad heaviness, is caused by direct pressure instead of indirectness. Yeah. So I'll show you actually, if we think of the most direct movement imaginable, if I just rest straight into my thumb like this, there's only 2 things that can happen. Either my thumb resists enough not to give way, or it doesn't, and it does indeed give way. So if it resists enough, there's nothing else here. The more direct the pressure, the more we have the sense there's nowhere else to go. So an indirect pressure like this has somewhere to go still. I can move the key, and I'm not stuck, I have somewhere to go. That's why this kind of weight is so important, because it literally frees us, even downwards. You can free yourself downwards. It's less obvious. Now slurs. course, two-note slurs, we always come upwards. And it's simpler, there's nothing up there, as I said. But we do need to be able to free ourselves downwards as well. If we want to have the easiest chance of getting this nice, strong, open hand position without working hard for it, we have to be able to get the wrist down. And see, if I start here then come down, there's nothing bearing on this because the movement is in this indirect path around the point of contact. It makes it so little work for my thumb to keep my arch open like this. I can do that with any finger if I come down like this. I just have to remember this is not relaxation. I'm not falling down. I'm not letting go of the finger. The finger stays in the key as the wrist comes down. And the more the wrist comes down, the more I'm creating space for the hand to do what it needs to do. As long as I don't mistake it for a direct pressure. Now, you could actually be applying a direct pressure while you do this, and then I'm still working too hard. That's why we have to understand the only thing that keeps that key down is perhaps, aside from the finger action, maybe the weight of the hand, we could argue, but it's certainly not the weight of the arm, because I'm trying to deliver the weight of the arm to that finger. That means direct pressure. Wasted effort to resist that direct pressure. So, yes, strong arch in piano playing, this kind of stuff, this kind of shape. I honestly believe there's not that much strength in it, personally. I think I've made so many mistakes before where I was doing the direct pressure, either squashing the hand or working it very hard in its arch. Now, I think we should be able to have a strong enough hand to resist direct pressures. It should be possible. But if this is our standard movement, we're just working it much harder than necessary for me. The big thing in getting a really good arch, really good open hand shape, is learning to let this down to take the weight off the hand, while the hand itself creates the engagement that keeps us in the keys. So actually, even I will sometimes play chords with the down movement. Generally, I tend to think, yeah, this is the most standard thing, push forwards and over. But it's so easy to overdo that. Increasingly, I tend to feel more now. Now, it doesn't matter too much either way. If there's a little bit of a drift upwards, the weight of the arm is slowing that. That's perfectly fine. If there's a slow movement downwards, that's perfectly fine. So it's neither the big thrust, that's just excessive, nor is it a swing down. So that kind of thing, as we said with the leverage, that doesn't deliver the energy to the right place. So the down movement, if we do it, it's not the accelerator. It's just checking that we have somewhere to go. We're not pushing straight into the direct line of the fingertips. We're going somewhere else instead. So it can be fairly small. In the end, I don't mind if I have a little bit of a drift up or a bit of a drift down. I just want to make sure I've understood the difference between the fingers engaging with the keys at the business end and these indirect things taking place in the wrist. This is how I know I'm in true balance, not stuck, not jammed in hard. But there's always somewhere else to go. And that, for me, is what weight is for. So the really important thing to understand in terms of how weight really works is that we have a wrist. Don't forget that exists. Because if we didn't have a wrist, if this was just rigid, like a single plank, then when we come down, the weight goes into the hand. And then when we take the weight away, we take it off the hand. It doesn't work that way. The reality is, when the wrist comes down, if we go about it in the correct way, that lightens things. When the wrist goes up, in fact, up can be either as well. Up can be the sign of a thrust and really bearing heavily in a direct path upon the hand while doing so. Or it can be a sign that we're just drifting into nothingness. So it's not as simple as down means more weight. Up means less weight. We have to differentiate those things to really understand. And don't forget that coming down, you can't use that to move the keys effectively. As we said with the leverage, bringing this end down, all that does is it means that it's the weight at this end that determines whether the key moves. In this case, that's not enough to move it. But whilst playing, if we mistake this kind of swing of the wrist as an energy source, we're getting it horribly wrong. This is where I think those who say it's all in the fingers and it's nothing to do with arm weight, yeah, they're making a crazy distortion. It's way beyond the reality. But it certainly is important to understand that when using weight in this way, It's not actually what makes the keys move. It's not effective at all for that. If I place a little passage, in this kind of thing, I practiced this a lot before doing these big swings. I tried to play it for real like that, forgetting. Well, I wasn't even thinking about it at the time. But this difference between the weight here and what goes on at the business end. So swinging that down, it causes a lot of stress on the shoulder. We don't need these big chaotic movements. So if I practice that first, sinking down like this, ultimately I have to understand in the end, we're not getting that movement in the end. What we're getting is just this indirect force to push back against. So instead of that fall, we don't have to do that, no. We just have to let the weight go, and then the fingers move the keys. It's not the fingers just stabilising a weight. Again, back to this. If it's just stabilising, you're in the same situation as that. It doesn't do anything. For this to actually work when the wrist comes down, it has to be incidental around fingers that move the keys. It's gently blocked by the action of the fingers, so very little of that happens in the end. We don't see too much of it. And that's because it's only a counterweight. It's not the energy source. It's not cranking the energy in this strange, indirect way. It's providing something to stabilise the fingers while they do their job. So down movements are some of the hardest ones to master. But you need to understand the difference between down to move the keys and down as a genuine source of freedom. It's not all about the up ones to be free. We don't want to have that as the only option.